Welcome to the Metta Hour with Sharon Salzberg, where Buddhist wisdom meets everyday life. This podcast is brought to you by the Be Here Now Network and features interviews with the top leaders, teachers, and thinkers of the mindfulness movement and beyond. For more information, visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Sharon.
Hi, I'm Sharon Salzberg, and today I'm joined by Gary Gach. Gary has been meditating and writing for nearly 60 years and is lay-ordained in Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village community of engaged Buddhism. He's the author of the best-selling book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Buddhism, that has been published in numerous magazines and anthologies. His most recent book, Pause, Breathe, Smile, Awakening Mindfulness When Meditation is Not Enough, was released in September of this year from Sounds True Publications. He's also the author of a poetry anthology, What Book? Buddha Poems from Beat to Hip Hop. So welcome, Gary.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Sharon.
Thank you so much. And it actually worked. We worked it out.
Yay.
These things are not easy. So I usually like to begin just by asking what brought you to the path of meditation and how your path with it has unfolded.
Oh, well, I don't know if I could put it on the back of a matchbook, but I'll try. The simple
Say
answer,
as long as you want.
Okay, well, it's just kind of simple that when I was 8, I had a vision of what I later found out is called interbeing. I didn't know what it was, but it was like so powerful that I kept it like a piece of gold that I didn't want to be mixed in with my coins, and there's a special blue jeans pocket for that kind of thing. So metaphorically, I just sort of, it stayed with me in my bones. And then I was getting cigars for my grandfather at the corner liquor store, cigar store, and there was a paperback book in the spin rack with a beautiful picture of a Buddha and calligraphy saying, "The Way of Zen." So I splurged 35 cents and took it home, and lo, on page 37, there was what I saw. Didn't have anything to do with creator deity or soul or heaven or anything that most people would connect it to that I would talk to. It was pretty much what the Buddha talks about, the unimpeded interpenetration of all things as being the nature of reality. So from there, I decided, well, must be the way I vibrate when I resonate with the universe, and set out to find out more. There was you probably don't remember this, but maybe some of the older members who are listening remember there was these things called the Little Blue Books, and you could get them for anywhere from 5 cents to 15 cents. And they were mail order, and they had hundreds of things. And I got one on yogi meditation. So I, started with a little pamphlet, because in those days, and also being a young kid, it wasn't accessible. Like now kids are learning in school, but not when I was in school. And then when I, left school, there were still more Buddhas sitting behind glass cases in museums than people teaching living people sitting around on cushions or anything. So there was then that long, long period of observing what does Rick Fields call it, the swans coming to the lake. The coming of the Dharma to America. And I was very fortunate to meet Suzuki Roshi and Katagari Roshi. I also had a Hasidic teacher, Shlomo Karlebach, and studied Kabbalah with him. But when I met Thich Nhat Hanh and the Sangha in their second visit to Berkeley, I was like, oh, this is it. I felt at home. I felt warmth as well as light. So that became my the teacher for modeling how this goes about, and a community with which to practice, and how to build a community eventually, because there wasn't one in San Francisco. So I learned about starting a Sangha on your own. And well, let's see, our Sangha has been meeting weekly for 10 years now. So that's in a nutshell.
That's great. So the word Sangha means community, I should say.
Yeah,
In case
thank you.
anybody doesn't quite get that.
It's a group of people that want to practice together. And we sit and walk and talk. And if people said, well, I sit and I walk and I talk, I'd say, yeah, but when we sit, we know we're sitting. We're not doing anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And we go outdoors and we walk on the green earth by 4 large poplars and smell the sea breeze and hear the birds and give thanks to Mother Earth just by walking and being alive. And talking is sort of what we might say we're doing. We're communing with each other at the source, listening.
So tell me, first of all, congratulations on your new book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's always an achievement, I think, to pull all the pieces together and actually create a book. Really a big achievement. And so tell me, what was the impetus for it?
Oh, good question. Looking back now, I would say one of the big motivations, reasons, impetuses was that this is in 2013. I wanted two things, I guess. One is I wanted to express or write or create, having been ordained and seeing what it would be like, because ordination for me was very transformative.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't write this book the way I would have written anything else. It was just it became part of the practice, writing as mindfulness. And at that time, as I began writing about mindfulness, there was evidences of pushback or backlash against aspects of the secularization of mindfulness, or the adoption of mindfulness by neoliberals or whatever it was. It just started coming out everywhere, and I'm like, well, gee, guys, you can't throw away the baby with the dishwater here. Whether or not whatever these critiques are.
Actually, I think it's bathwater. People don't usually throw away babies with dishwater.
Oh, did I say dishwater?
By the way, I know you're a poet, but
no, I'm
just to be more literal about it.
Thank you.
I mean, what was the baby doing in the dishwater to begin with?
What's the baby doing with the Lux soap? Anyhow, so what I thought I'd do would be to see if I could consolidate a lot of the good ground and use it as a base to build out further, so that people might have a sense of mindfulness as not just a, say, technique, but as a way of living and being that could be 24/7. Which is what I think it is. It's what it is for me. And so, for a beginner, it could be a very good way to begin. For somebody who's already adept, it could be an interesting way to see it from a new lens. I guess one of the ideas is that you can see, all these advantages that people are advertising, like better focus or quality relations or calm or everything, as certainly attainable, but also not as being necessarily ends, but as prompts for maybe taking a deeper dive. And the book affords that opportunity.
So the book is divided into 3 main sections, right? Pause, breathe, and then smile. And so if you could walk us through each one of those, that would be great.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a 3-handled title. It also is the structure of the book. But
that's convenient.
Yeah, it worked out well. And I also will add it has a table of contents where the 3 are just in interpenetrating circles or spheres, and you can read them in any order.
Oh, how cool. That's really great.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to do that whole, I got tired of the the mail order kind of linear table of contents. They have both. But what I'm really trying to say is that the three are interdependent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about each three, but that it's how they interact that makes mindfulness something you can take off the mat and practice, 24/7. So pausing refers to intention. For example, a jewel thief may be in the now. It's like the job description really is being in the now. But they may not have a sense of what they do as affecting others and causing harm. They may be thinking only of themselves. A narcissist can be in the now, but they aren't necessarily developing conscious conduct that could benefit themselves and others. So pausing refers to that kind of a discipline, discerning also that one is able to take a step back and bring space into the situation that one is in. So you're not reacting all the time, but able to discern and then respond in an intentional way, so that we can, not be sleepwalking. So we're not just following our animal natures or something, and really live a beautiful, fulfilling life that we're meant to live. Breathing, it's almost counterintuitive that you would tell anybody anything about breathing, but we're breathing 20,000 times a day, and we're not always conscious of our breathing. And as many of the listeners, if not most, know, by shifting our awareness to our breathing, we give ourselves a focus of awareness that enables us not only to be in the now, because our body is breathing now and here, but also it helps integrate. It allows the body and the mind to integrate. I'll put it that way. I don't necessarily that breath does it, but it creates a space in which body and mind find each other, and not only settle down, but that can unify. I mean, I could go on about breathing. It's such a marvelous thing, but just one of the aspects of mindfulness that's unique is it's not breathing any particular way. Pranayama, as I understand it, in yoga, seems to want to have a certain full quality of breath, whereas mindful breathing, as I understand it, is about letting the breath be what it is and not controlling it in the least. Just letting go and being aware, and then seeing if the breath, if it wants to be longer, if it wants to be shorter, if it wants to be smoother, and noticing how the mind also has a similar qualities of depth and focus and so forth. So, breathing is seems like every tradition knows breathing somehow as part of the contemplative path, and with this little unique aspect of it that mindfulness brings to it. My editor, Carolyn Pincus, bless her soul, she said, now, smiling, how are you going to get that across? As something that often you smile because it's beyond words. It's just kind of a fruition. Really, what it refers to here is a wisdom philosophy or tradition of ways of looking at the world. And I think kind of three central interrelated views here are that everything's impermanent, just like breath is, that everything's interconnected, just like breath is, and everything's open and selfless. That we don't need to control because everything is already infinitely possible. And that kind of recognition brings us freedom from a sense of isolation or separation from everything else. And just the practice of smiling, just the actual mouth yoga, as someone called it. Jack Kornfield corrected me when I used half smile at one point. He said, it's just a faint smile.
Mm.
It's like two muscles. It can be an inner smile. Nobody sees. So pausing, breathing, and smiling is something that anyone can always practice in a moment. And it refers to the structure of viewing and living in a mindful way with intentionality, a contemplative, reflective philosophy, and just in harmony with what is.
Well, it strikes me, first of all, that pausing, is often difficult for us. It's hard to remember. And I don't know that it's that hard to do, but I find it takes, for me and people I encounter, it takes a good degree of intentionality because most people's lives are pretty full. We're over busy. We're consumed with things. We're overwrought, and we're anxious. And I think of Thich Nhat Hanh's, one of his pretty famous recommendations, like don't pick up the phone on the first ring, let it ring 3 times and breathe. And I remember going into a financial firm in New York and saying that, and I looked up and I saw the complete panic on everyone's faces. And I said, well, maybe for you guys just twice, just let it ring twice. But even twice, who's going to remember? You need strong intentionality to remember in the midst of chaos and, all of that.
I think of a saying, it's 6 words that I think you once said, but maybe you're quoting someone. Practice is in the return.
Yes, that is me.
I love it. I think it applies here too. As I remember, it refers to being aware that when you're sitting and the mind has wandered and you're aware the mind has wandered, the practice is being aware, not beating oneself up of, I'm a failure, my mind wanders, I can't do this, but just recognizing, I have a mind and my mind wanders, and bringing it back and returning. And that bringing back and returning is a form, I think, of intentionality. So the way I look at it now in my own practice is that when I find a little thing that works for me, like, I recognize my mind wandered. I recognized I wanted to beat myself up, but I said, nah, don't do it. Better just to go back to the breathing. The breathing's better. That I could use that as a model that I could apply by extension. So that when I recognize I have this kind of intentionality muscle somewhere, I don't know where it is, but I know I've done it. The more I can find applications for it, the more I recognize it's possible and useful. And I agree, it's absolutely kind of going against the stream of the way we're designed as humans and the way our society is structured. But, as some people say, it's like conscious evolution.
This is why I think people use reminders. They have their computer make some funny sound every now and then, or the phone ringing, or I have a friend who's a second-generation meditator, and he said he was about 7 years old or so, and his parents said to him, you can buy we're going to give you a packet of stickers, like these red circles. And they said, you can put these up anywhere in your bedroom that you want. So he did. And then they said, and every time your eye falls on a red circle, just take a breath.
Yeah, the red dot meditation. Another one
and that was his first
Velcro.
meditation.
You get a little Velcro circle, and you put it, say, behind your computer. And then you reach behind your computer and you just touch the Velcro.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a picture as well as a sound.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, it could be the sight of something, the reminder. And I find that anything can be a reminder.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something annoying. You know.
That's funny.
Well,
give me an example of an annoying reminder.
You know,
A sound, a noise.
The siren or the low-flying helicopter, and then recognizing my mind is being annoyed. Well, my mind is being annoyed right now. Mm-hmm. It's a reminder. I'm right now. It's here and now. Yeah.
That's very funny. For, certain weeks, you might say, I'm going to use only annoying reminders now. I'm in such a bad mood.
Well, yeah, I guess you could. I think the creative part of it is seeing what it could be any particular day. You know, it doesn't have to be, on Tuesdays, it's going to be annoying things, and Wednesday, it's going to be angry things. But it could just be anything and when I need it, and sometimes when I least expected it. The one that always gets me is, say, if I'm meditating, and like I hear the phone or something, or the cable car bell, and what am I supposed to stop? I'm already meditating. But then I realize, well, maybe you should just stop this idea that you're meditating and just enjoy sitting.
Does your community ever do these things collectively, like make a resolve, like, this week we're going to use this as a reminder or something like that?
It's an idea. I hadn't thought of it. It could be a journal kind of an activity. This week, write all the instances where, and you pick a kind of reminder. That's a good idea.
I mean, I just thought of it because we don't do exactly this in Barrie and the community around the Insight Meditation Society, but sometimes we do undertake kind of collective resolves, because resolve is also a factor in this working, right? So one resolve, for example, would be if you have a really strong desire to give something, not just like a little dwippy passing thought, but, it really comes up, I want to give this, whatever, and it's not going to cause harm. It's not like I'm going to give away all my money, give it, even if the next 50 thoughts are fearful. Like, you want to give someone a book, and then you think, well, I've been carrying it around through 3 moves. I haven't read it yet, but it's so close to the top of the pile, and maybe it's the one book I need to read to be enlightened. I shouldn't give it away. And, but watch your mind the whole time. So you watch the impulse to give and what that feels like. You watch what it's like when all the fear comes and the resistance. You watch what it's like as you actually give it, and you watch what it's like afterwards. Like, do you ever actually regret it? And so that just gives us a way of exploring something that has a whole range of feelings, and is a real great life lesson, and we do it together.
And how do you share the resistances and the breakthroughs as a group?
Well, through conversation, because we're all there in the same,
That's perfect. That's so good. I'll bring it to my community.
All right. That's so great.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by insight?
What do I mean by insight?
Yeah, like, if the fruition, like through smile, right, is insight, I was thinking of that because some of the critique, the mindfulness blowback, which you referenced before, has to do with, I think, a lack of emphasis on mindfulness leading to insight. And so there's sort of either an equation of mindfulness with just focus. Calm, exactly. And some sense of, well, of course it's not that radical or it's not that transformational because you're just feeling a little better,
Right. Well, I'm kind of reluctant to answer to the question being asked by my idol, my heroine, first creator of the first intentional secular mindfulness community in America called Insight Meditation.
Yeah,
People ask you, what's insight? Do you have a ready, short answer?
Oh, it doesn't have to be short. I'm just, what would you call the fruition of
Okay, so I'll
kind
go.
of practice?
So for me, you've really set it up that part of it is you have to be able to be centered and grounded, but that's not necessarily enough. So I'm centered and grounded, and I'm calm and I'm focused. Now what?
Right.
And that when we're in our range of ability to be sovereign to our own lives and helpful for others, the way I look at it is as a mirror, just to use an analogy, that life mirrors for me. It could be love, it could be compassion, it could be the possibility of fear or anger, that whatever it is, whether I see it in myself or others, I recognize, and this becomes an insight that just sort of occurs, that this pertains in an important way to me and others for identifying and accepting and working with to transform a limited point of view into something that's more spacious and available for other people. And they often have to do with these philosophical things, like inner being. Oh, well, if I felt that, then somebody else would have, that there's a kind of a ripple effect of things, or, but so given an impetus of an insight kind of arising of itself, it's just sort of a mirroring process where you go from, I'm grounded and I'm calm, and to just, an insight arises. Then what I do, and I think this is partly what a lot of the tradition of insight is, correct me if I'm wrong, is I'll come back to it another time when I'm on the cushion, or maybe just walking from the car to the door, and bring it up and kind of look at it a little more. See, it's like a cat that wants to show you how to play with it. Just explore it. See where it goes, and see what's behind that, and what's connected to this, and what if I let it go, and what's at stake, and that part of it, I guess I call it discernment. Tibetans call it analytic mind. It is usually overlooked. In the common sense of, it's the image of some guy with a long beard on top of a mountain that you're supposed to climb, and he's supposed to tell you something. But it's that process of being receptive to life, informing us what we need to know, and having the resolve and tools to work with it, so that the insight can take us further along. I should stop.
I think that's great, because I think
close to what.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, I think that, I was thinking of your initial comment about the blowback,
Yeah.
and how, what people are complaining about doesn't exactly match my experience of mindfulness and its potential, which includes, kind of, you could say analysis. It's not cognitive analysis per se, but it's a really deep looking. In Pali, the word is actually a compounded sati, which is mindfulness, sati sampajanya, which is mindfulness and clear comprehension.
Right.
So they're considered to go together.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like twin wings.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I'm being kind of asking you as my older sister in this path is that, my tradition in the Vietnamese Zen mindfulness tradition, we never use the word insight that I can recall. Yeah. And yet we do work with the insight process of deep looking.
Right.
Maybe because it includes Zen along with the mindfulness. I don't know, but it's back to why one reason I kind of wanted, and I didn't write the book to tell anybody this is what mindfulness is. I just thought, if I'm going to spend the time to learn something, what better way to learn something than to write a book, is to get a better handle on. Because I've always wondered, well, what is insight? It isn't something that somebody can tell you. They can maybe tell you their own story, but that's their story.
Yeah.
And to find out for oneself, and then to be able to present the kind of space and causes and conditions that one can look at to find out for oneself. It seemed to me to be a neglected the stereotype. There's a stereotype of mindfulness neglecting deep-seeing, comprehensive-looking, clear-looking, and integrating it with. There's something I learned in Vietnamese called study, observe, practice. I'll share with you. It's a Vietnamese term, and it's apparently fairly common in Vietnamese Zen, where you need something I need something to feed my head. I just can't get all this from the air. From sitting. I need a teacher or something to point me to something to study. And as I study it, I observe it in my life. And observing it in my life means I observe it within myself first. And I also notice it elsewhere outside of myself. But anything I'm seeing outside of myself is often my own reflection of my own biases and views. If I think somebody is doing something that's annoying, it's really something within me that gets annoyed about something. So I study something, then I'm observing it in the world, and then I put it into practice. Studying, observing it, and then putting it into practice by not just observing and studying, but actually doing in action, creates the possibility that, maybe there is a better way, or, maybe this is a tether that I need to let go of so I can go further. And then that might return me back for more study and for more observation. But for me, it's a good rubric for my training and deepening my insight.
What's funny, I've always thought of Thich Nhat Hanh as a poet.
Oh yeah, me too. I first read his poetry before anything else.
Really?
It was a little chapbook that came out of Santa Barbara in the 60s. Yeah.
I remember I was in Sri Lanka, and somewhere in the 70s, and somehow I got a copy of Miracle of Mindfulness, and I'd never heard of him, and I was just reading it, and I thought, oh my God, what an incredible, beautiful, poetic expression of everything that I believe in. So now I'm thinking of you as a poet, and that relationship between you and him as that appreciation in that realm.
'Tis true.
Because it does reach us in another place, not necessarily a literal instructional place, like do these four things.
I've listened to him in French, and I've listened to him in Vietnamese. And of course, I've listened to him in English. And he has a way with words that's just uncanny. And I don't think most people would go so far, but I would totally agree. It's poetry.
Yeah.
When he says of or the, it's as important as rock and love. So that everything is just invested with this tremendous care of of telling. Thank you for that, Sharon.
No, that's great. So I am, as you know, working on a book, and
Yeah.
it's about mindfulness, loving kindness, and social change or social action. And I realized that one of the assumptions that I and many people were making were that it was a very circumscribed definition of social change. And at one point, I realized my own limitation. And I was in conversation with someone, and I said, what about art,
Yeah.
What about really opening this definition? Because art may be incredibly disruptive and onward-leading and pointing us to inspiration, inspiring us to action. So I'd love to talk to you about that.
Oh, gosh. And consciousness changing.
And consciousness changing.
And how do we change the so-called world and people if we can't change their consciousness?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can change consciousness, it seems like everything else would seem to follow. Although you read the political philosophers, and some say no, you have to change the material world first.
Mm-hmm.
But even they will agree, that there's a very important role that we have where art seems to be more than just, please pass the salt.
Mm-hmm.
Although please pass the salt is a kind of an art too,
Mm-hmm.
It's direct and it goes right to the source. But to say something in a way that, lifts one out of oneself so that one empathizes with the person saying it.
Mm-hmm.
There's the reader and there's the writer, and that implies a communion already of a social bond.
Mm-hmm.
I think all art in some way. I'll give you feedback just from my own sense of reading your recent book, Real Love, which I love. And
Thank
how
you.
it uses these three models of love in oneself and love for another and love in the world. And I think art is like that. At some level, I can keep a journal and nobody may ever see it, but I could write, all kinds of things, and yet that can change my way of seeing and viewing. And to consider it as being a social medium, whether it's dance or painting or writing, that someone else is going to witness it, someone else is going to commune with it.
Mm-hmm.
That implies, a way of connecting with other people and communicating and communing with other people that can be quite different than the usual, like poetry is outside the realm of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
It exists outside of the cash nexus.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you may get a grant, but it's kind of a non-paying profession. And in that sense, art is also, and then also I think of art as being just the nature of reality. As more and more I think of it as Mother Earth. That Mother Earth is this great artist.
Oh wow, yeah.
That's just created, not just you and me, but everything that we know of practically is all a product of this great artist, Mother Earth, with cooperation of Father, Son, or whatever, and the whole universe. That the universe is in a creative state, and that when I'm creative, when I'm being artistic, it's just really kind of following, my true nature, and allows me to recognize everyone's my brother, everyone's my sister, that I don't really own the art. It becomes its own. To go back to what I said at the first thing about my awakening, at the same time that I came to Buddhism, or awakening way of living, I also started writing. I wrote my first poem when I was 10.
Wow.
And, it's just, for me, they've always been kind of inseparable.
Mm-hmm.
So I respect your question just to the utmost, because for me it very much confirms what it is that is I'm about as a career, as a human being who writes and practices and tries not to see them as separate things.
Did you receive like support and encouragement? Because as I'm listening to you being so young, when you began, the first person that actually came to my mind in two different stories was Joseph Goldstein.
Yeah.
My colleague, where
Yeah.
I think I tell this story actually. One of these stories in Real Love, and one he tells quite a lot himself, was I think he was in kindergarten and he got a big red F on his report card for arts and crafts, because he was messy. And that sight of that big red F was like, I think the last time in his life was messy also. But and he tells also the story himself of, I don't know how old he was, but he was in choir or whatever, glee club, whatever they called it in his school. And his teacher said to him, like, please just mouth the words, because they thought his voice was really bad. And then he tells the story about, of course, years and years and decades later, he was sitting in sesshin with Sasaki Roshi, and the koan he was given was, how do you manifest Buddha nature while chanting the Heart Sutra? So, of course, the answer was something like chanting the Heart Sutra in the Roshi's presence, and which was an agonizing thing for him. And he went through whatever changes he went through, and then he sang it. He chanted it. And after, mocking him after all these days, Sasaki Roshi just said, "Oh, very nice,"
without being aware what a vindication it was.
So he passed his koan, but so many people, their spirits or their creativity kind of gets squashed. It sounds like you had a lot of support.
I had a lot of determination, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true. We don't live in a society that tends to promote the image of the artist in a role model that's something we might all aspire to, as much as we have this image of, the tortured artist. And I also changed my practices, changed my view of art and artists too.
Mm-hmm.
Where I no longer see it so much as self-expression, which is a common way of looking at it, but, as I was saying earlier, as of just being in touch with oneself and a way of communicating with other people and being part of the universe as a creative gesture, or like the universe is all a performance. Yeah, but there is certainly more, just like there's mindfulness in the schools, there's now poetry in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of poetry, but there's other arts that kids, I think the slams that kids do are terribly creative, even if they may be a little prima donna oriented. They're kind of all about me being better than everybody else and everybody competing at some level. But eventually, it's become a real kind of common thing that kids are now creating their own art. It's like a children's book isn't usually by a child.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's by an adult for children. But now kids are writing children's books.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I look back to when I was first starting and now, I think it's the trend is more toward enabling, encouraging, and supporting creativity as part of the path. You just look at Julia Cameron, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, that's true.
It's amazing. When I was, in that growing up period, I can't think of anything like that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about when what book is called when that came out.
Well, it took 5 years.
Uh-huh.
So when did it finally come out? I'm a bad historian. and they don't have a copy by me.
I guess I was curious about what era of hip hop you reached.
Well, so the subtitle of what book, referring to hip hop, beat to hip hop, it's more of a measure of time from 1950 to today.
Okay.
Than being, say, examples of countercultural poetry or anything. It really is eclectic in including, it has 125 contributors, from monks and kids to veterans to some of the Fluxus people like Yoko Ono, and Thich Nhat Hanh's poetry. So it's more a recognition that there's been this influence of the Buddha or of awakening in poetry that I felt should be acknowledged, because Rumi and then soon Mary Oliver were really captivating a considerably large audience, larger than it would be for Wallace Stevens or something, as a popular art form. And I wanted to just make a large corkboard to put up instances and stand back and see what it might look like. And it seems like the influence, there's a kind of a revival of devotional poetry. And a lot of that includes stuff influenced by the Buddha. Someone else, I'm sure, could do one on yoga and contemporary Christian mysticism.
Oh, great. So I'm wondering if just
and
as
I'll
our
send you
time,
a copy if you don't have one.
I think I used to have one, so I would love a copy.
I'll send you a new one.
Great.
Great.
Fabulous. As we are sadly drawing to a close in our conversation, I'm wondering if we could close with your leading some kind of reflection or contemplation from your newest work, Pause, Breathe, and Smile.
I'd be thrilled and honored. Usually, I remind people I'm with and listeners to check in with their body to see if they are in a suitably awakened state, if relaxed dignity in their composure, maybe with the feeling where you're making contact with your body in the earth or the body in a chair, letting the head be like a ping pong ball on top of a fountain. And when I describe breathing, I always have to say, I'll be saying this, but if you're doing this, breathing is with the tongue on the roof of the mouth and breathing through the nostrils. And just noticing the freshness of the air in the in-breath. And seeing if the breath is warmed by the body with the exhale. And this is good. I'm going to do it again. Breathing in, I'm feeling more of my body now. I'm feeling ribs expanding and such. Breathing out, letting go. I'm feeling the abdomen falling. And this is good. I'm going to do this again one more time. Breathing in, I'm feeling more sense of space. Breathing out, I'm feeling a sense of the heart opening to a larger sense of what is. And so with just 3 conscious breaths, pausing, breathing, smiling, I'm going to seal it with a smile and see what it feels like. See if, besides maybe feeling happier, just by the kind of mouth yoga, that if I do this, I will experience something. By adjusting the body, it has a corresponding perceptual feel, but also noticing how my smile makes me feel more sovereign. I feel this is my experience, and it's adequate, and my smile confirms it. So this is a pausing, breathing, smiling that you can do any time throughout the day, whether you hear a bell, a phone, or you put a red dot on something, or you just notice the sky is blue and how happy the shade of blue might make you feel, or kind of noticing the solidity of the earth for the first time today. Or it could be a child looking with the eyes of wonder at everything. Or it could be the annoying sound of some helicopter. But whatever it is, this opportunity to pause, enjoy a few conscious breaths, and sort of set an intentionality of whatever it is that one's contacted and wants to further, certainly of being happy and for all beings to be happy. Because if you're not enjoying this, I don't know why you want to do it. And you could use a literal bell, or you could just make anything your prompt. So I'll invite a closure with the sound of a bell.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was beautiful.
Thank you so much, Sharon.
And thank you all for joining us today. To learn more about Gary's work and teachings, you can visit his website at www.garygach, that's GaryGach.com. And I encourage you to get a copy of his book, Pause, Breathe, Smile, which is available September 2018, everywhere that books are sold. Thank you.
Hey folks, thanks for listening. To learn more about Sharon and her ongoing teaching schedule, as well as online courses and a free guided meditation, check out her website at SharonSalzberg.com.